Hi, I'm Allison, and this is Learning Literature. If you have any requests for books you'd like me to discuss, please put them in the comments. Today I'll be discussing Shakespeare's Coriolanus. If you watched my Starting Shakespeare video, you know that I recommend watching a version of the play before reading it. For Coriolanus, if you can get it, I really like the Donmar Warehouse version with Tom Hiddleston. For this video, I've decided to summarize every scene in case you have questions about them, although some scenes are pretty short and are less important to the main plot or themes. Coriolanus is a lesser-known Shakespearean play, but I'm not sure why. Yes, the protagonist can come across as an elitist jerk, and the play is pretty harsh in criticizing democracy, but that's all part of its charm. It's full of action, rude insults, and challenging themes about pride and political power. The play is set in the early days of the Roman Republic and addresses tensions between the classes. On the one hand, the patricians, the upper class, who have always ruled, and on the other hand, the plebeians, or plebs, who have never had wealth or political power. These tensions are demonstrated by the play's beginning, which shows random citizens, some plebs, leading a revolt because they are starving. They claim the rich, the patricians, are withholding grain. They call Caius Marcius out specifically because he hates the common man. They admit he has helped the city with his fighting, but he has done it only for his own pride and to please his mother. Hint, hint about their relationship being unusual. A pause for name clarification. Once he defeats the city of Corioli, Caius Marcius will be given the name Coriolanus, which is what he'll be called for the rest of the play. So they are talking about Coriolanus here. Menenius, a senator, almost succeeds in soothing the plebs with the parable of the belly. In the story, various body parts, the plebs, complain because the belly, patricians, has all of the food but does not do any work. The belly then explains that, while it initially receives the food, it doesn't keep it, but instead distributes the most valuable parts of the food to the other body parts, only keeping the leftover bits for itself. Thus, Menenius argues that it's not true that the plebeians are fed for doing nothing. In fact, it's just the opposite, he argues. Our protagonist, our hero, Marcius, enters, and perhaps in a clear insight into his character, uses his first lines to insult the plebs. "What's the matter, you licentious rogues, that, rubbing the poor itch of your opinion, make yourselves scabs? With every minute you do change a mind, and call him noble that was now your hate, him vile that was your garland." His criticism centers on the accusation that the plebs are fickle, as partly demonstrated by the fact that they loved Marcius when he protected the city, but hate him now. He specifically complains that for the first time in this new Republican government, the plebs have been given political representation, tribunes, who specifically work for the interests of the plebs. Just as Coriolanus hates the plebs, the tribunes totally hate Coriolanus. Whether or not the plebs should have political representation is a crucial question of the play. Is simply existing as citizens sufficient reason to participate in the governing of the city? Or do the citizens need to earn this representation through their virtue or contributions to the city, as Coriolanus believes? They are interrupted to be informed of a Volsci attack, led by Aufidius, with whom Marcius has a long history. "Were I anything but what I am, I would wish me only he. He is a lion that I am proud to hunt." This is really strong praise for Marcius's arch enemy. In scene 2, the Volscis realize the Romans are prepared for their attack. Aufidius confirms that Marcius is his arch enemy. Back in Rome, we meet Marcius's mother, Volumnia, and his wife, Virgilia. Volumnia is obsessed with the honors Marcius has won and can win in battle. Hear me profess sincerely, had I a dozen sons, each in my love alike, and none less dear than thine and my good Marcius, I had rather had 11 die nobly for their country than one voluptuously surfeit out of action. An introduction to quite the loving mother. She cares more about the accolades her sons might win than, them actually being alive. This attitude about what is valued in men is emphasized with the rather gruesome story about Marcius's son adorably ripping apart a butterfly with his teeth. Cut to the fighting. Romans advance but are pushed back. Marcius is mad at the citizens who are supposed to be fighting with him, but are fleeing. You souls of geese that bear the shapes of men, how have you run from slaves that apes would beat? Marcius runs into the city, alone, survives, and defeats part of the city single-handedly. Scene 5 continues with Marcius still fighting inside the city, seeking Aufidius. In the next scene, Marcius meets with the leading general, Cominius, who is also a former consul. Marcius insists that he will keep fighting, despite his injuries, and leaves with some men whom he inspires. In scene 7, Marcius proceeds to lead those men into Corioli. In scene 8, Marcius and Aufidius finally face off. Marcius is winning, but to Aufidius's great anger, his own men rescue him from impending death. Scene 9 brings success. Marcius did it. The Romans have defeated the city of Coriolanus. Marcius refuses the praise and the financial rewards. Is this because of his modesty or extreme pride that he doesn't think these people are even worthy of praising him? This is where he is given the name Coriolanus. Act 1 ends with Aufidius shaking his fist in hatred for Marcius. Act 2 opens in Rome. Waiting for news from the fighting, the tribunes are criticizing Coriolanus for being proud, when Menenius comes in to criticize them, arguing that they are ignorant and that Coriolanus has reason to be proud. As they bicker, Coriolanus comes back into the city and is welcomed by everyone. Volumnia is very excited at all he has accomplished and immediately hopes for more, because she's Volumnia. I have lived to see inherited my very wishes and the buildings of my fancy. Only there's one thing wanting, which I doubt not but our Rome will cast upon thee. Defeating a foreign invader by yourself is wonderful, but now become consul of the city. Classic pushy, dissatisfied mother. That's nice, but what else are you going to accomplish? Coriolanus replies, No, good mother, I had rather be their servant in my way than sway with them in theirs. Coriolanus doesn't really seem to want to be consul. He is always demanding to live his way, which means a military life, one of bluntness and brutality, and neither of these traits seem like a good fit for a life in politics. The tribunes worry about how much everyone seems to love Coriolanus. They worry, maybe legitimately, that if he becomes consul, he'll take away their new power. They scheme with some mustache twirling to force him to fulfill the rather humbling traditions that they expect will be hard for him because of his ego. They are trying to push him to overreact with anger. Scene 2 opens with Roman officers debating if Coriolanus should become consul. The primary praise for Coriolanus is that he's a straight talker. The compelling response to this is that he's straightforward about how much he dislikes the plebs. In front of the Senate, Cominius praises Coriolanus to get him elected as consul. It is held that valor is the chiefest virtue and most dignifies the haver. The Romans hold valor as the main virtue, which says a lot about their value system and how it varies from more modern ideas about virtue. This means that for the Romans, Coriolanus is very virtuous. He's the epitome of valor. We've seen this in his actions in Corioli, and we can tell it from the history that Cominius now explains. Coriolanus is uncomfortable hearing himself praised. As before, is this because he is humble or so proud that he doesn't think these rabble deserve to hear of his greatness, doesn't want to have to sell himself to them? We see Coriolanus' reluctance to ask the plebs to vote for him, which requires wearing the gown of humility. It is a part that I shall blush in acting, and might well be taken from the people, to brag unto them, thus I did, and thus, showing them the unaching scars, which I should hide, as if I had received them for the hire of their breath only. Uncomfortable acting a part, always wanting to be honest and authentic. Coriolanus did not get the scars to win votes, and he feels cheap using them in this way. This seems to reflect pride. If it is pride, is it virtuous pride to always want to be so authentic? Nonetheless, at the tribune's insistence, Coriolanus is told that this is a necessary step to becoming consul. Scene 3 is Coriolanus' fulfillment of this tradition. It begins with random citizens debating Coriolanus' attempt to be consul. Again, they are debating it, considering the reasons for and against. Evidence that, unlike Coriolanus' accusation, the masses are not just mindless mobs, though they may not be as thoughtful and principled as the patricians. Just as the tribunes were hoping, Coriolanus struggles to fulfill the necessary traditions to become consul. Coriolanus is asking the plebs for their votes, but also insulting them and refusing to ask kindly. Coriolanus is pointing out that he should get the position because he deserves it, not because he is falsely flattering the common man. This seems like a reasonable point, but this scene is also the sort that reveals Coriolanus' cruelty towards the plebs. Coriolanus is unable or unwilling to make the transition from a military man to a politician, to a new life that requires gentleness and smooth talking that has never before been valued for him and which he disparages. As he stands there, we have a soliloquy, quite rare in this play, perhaps because introspection is not valued in this culture, which values valor so highly. Ultimately, this self-reflection about whether being consul is worth this immense shame gets him nowhere, and Coriolanus just continues with half-hearted fulfillment of the tradition. The citizens agree to support Coriolanus for consul, but then the tribunes return, annoyed that Coriolanus fulfilled the tradition and that their plan failed. So, on to plan B. They easily persuade the citizens into changing their minds and now rejecting Coriolanus. We could interpret their actions as politically manipulative, the tribunes doing whatever is necessary to keep their own power, or as protecting the power of the plebs from a real threat in Coriolanus. Act 3 begins with a rather unsurprising freakout from Coriolanus when he learns that the people have withdrawn their support. He insults them for being so fickle and warns that giving them power will lead to rebellion. After all, this new form of representative government might be threatened by giving political power to masses who are easily manipulated. For the mutable, rank-scented many, let them regard me as I do not flatter, and therein behold themselves. I say again, in soothing them, we nourish 'gainst our senate the cockle of rebellion, insolence, sedition, which we ourselves have plowed for, sowed, and scattered, by mingling them with us, the honored number, who lack not virtue, no, nor power, but that which they have given to beggars. It's hard to like a protagonist who is so rude about them, the beggars, versus us, the honored number. But he's raising interesting political questions. Coriolanus is working to keep the city strong, arguing that giving power to people too weak to be trusted endangers the city. Coriolanus argues against giving away free grain when the people haven't earned it. He points out that the people do not help to keep the city safe, which demonstrates that they are useless and shows their lack of valor. He claims that it weakens the Senate to give plebs whatever they demand out of fear, all of which are reasonable political points. The tribunes goad Coriolanus, trying to get rid of him. They might be doing this for good reasons in protecting the political representation of the plebs, but they don't seem to care about how much it hurts Rome. They seem unconcerned with the Senate's conception of keeping the city safe. What is the city but the people? The tribunes try to have Coriolanus killed for being a traitor, but Menenius and other senators pull him away. Menenius says Coriolanus has a worthy rage, and his nature is too noble for the world. He would not flatter Neptune for his trident or Jove for his power to thunder. Menenius seems to praise Coriolanus' integrity, though, having more political savvy himself, Menenius understands what it is costing Coriolanus. In scene 2, Coriolanus is brooding at home, insisting he is right to have been true to himself and bitter at his mother, who isn't supporting him. Why did you wish me milder? Would you have me false to my nature? Rather say I play the man I am. Even with his life on the line, Coriolanus stays true to himself and refuses to hold back any of his thoughts or temper his language at all. Volumnia agrees with his judgment of the plebs, but is conniving and ambitious enough to want him to be deceptive to gain power. I would have had you put your power well on before you had worn it out. Are we to support Coriolanus for tirading against the people for being worthless compared to himself? Or support Volumnia for suggesting that he pretend he doesn't think these things so that he can gain political power? Perhaps they are both wrong. The choice in an ideal leader isn't between admitting one's insulting beliefs or lying about them. Rather, an ideal leader would not have such beliefs. But while a worthy ideal, is this always an option in political leaders? Besides, as we've seen, in many ways, it seems Coriolanus is more valuable than the plebs of the city. As a great military leader, Coriolanus was on a clear path to become a Roman consul. He has traits this society clearly values, notably valor. It seems a great loss to the city to lose a potentially great leader. Volumnia tries to persuade Coriolanus to regain his position as a consul by apologizing, accusing him of being too absolute. This sounds like our modern accusation that someone is being an extremist, but what does this accusation really mean? Is it better to bend to those around you, to compromise? Or is Coriolanus' extremism a virtue? Is it good that he is unwilling to be deceptive about himself? Coriolanus reluctantly follows her prompting, acknowledging that, must I, with my base tongue, give to my noble heart a lie that it must bear? Well, I will do it. Yet, were there but this single plot to lose, this mold of marshes, they to dust should grind it and throw it against the wind. Coriolanus is so committed to his own vision of himself that he sees this insincerity as destroying him, undercutting who he is as a person, giving himself up to the people to grind to dust and throw him away. The next scene continues the tribune's plan to goad Coriolanus. It is immediately successful. They merely mention the accusation of him being a traitor, and he is set off insulting them, not caring that it will probably lead to his death. They sentence him to banishment, and his response is both fun writing and an important indicator of what is to come. You common cry of curs, whose breath I hate as reek of the rotten fens, whose loves I prize as the dead carcasses of unburied men that do corrupt my air. I banish you, and here remain with your uncertainty. Let every feeble rumor shake your hearts. Your enemies, with nodding of their plumes, fan you into despair. Your ignorance deliver you as most abated captives to some nation that won you without blows, despising for you the city. Thus I turn my back. There is a world elsewhere. This starts as a vivid example of Coriolanus' anger as he compares the plebs to dogs, saying they stink like a swamp and that he loves them as he loves decaying dead bodies. Then he banishes them, insisting still that he is the one with power. In that moment, he might seem petty and ridiculous, but immediately after, he explains himself. They will now stay in the city with no one capable to defend them. They will live in constant fear of their enemies attacking. Ultimately, he predicts that their poor decision to banish him will lead them into an enemy's control without even having the strength to defend themselves. He decisively turns his back on them, on the city, and seeks a life elsewhere. This ends Act 3. Stoically, Coriolanus says goodbye to his family and friends. His mother seems to genuinely weep for him. Whatever their relationship is, in this moment, she loves him and wants him with her. In Scene 2, Volumnia is dealing with her grief as one might expect, with anger. She meets the tribunes in the street and harasses them, insulting them as not appreciating Coriolanus and having been unworthy to judge him. When Menenius invites her to dinner, she responds, "Anger is my meat. I sup upon myself, and so shall starve with feeding." She is overwhelmed with her anger. It is, in this context, a very male response. She is not lamenting and mourning, which is all Virgilia has done the whole play, but is fighting back as best as she can. Scene 3 cuts to a Roman informant giving information to a Volsci spy. The Roman tells the Volsci that Coriolanus has been banished, so it's a good time for Aufidius to attack Rome. In Scene 4, we learn where Coriolanus goes when he explores the world elsewhere. He comes to Antium to meet with Aufidius, to try to side with him and fight against Rome. The next scene continues with Coriolanus making his proposal to Aufidius, being very clear that he's bitter at the injustice of his banishment and wants revenge. He comes in mere spite to be full quit of those my banishers. Make my misery serve thy turn. So use it, that my revengeful services may prove as benefits to thee. For I will fight against my cankered country with the spleen of all the under-fiends. Aufidius immediately takes him up on his offer, giving Coriolanus control over half of his own troops, and saying Coriolanus' judgment will be trusted in how to best destroy Rome. Scene 6 is back in Rome as they get word that Coriolanus has joined with Aufidius and is attacking. Coriolanus' friends, Menenius and Cominius, turn on the tribunes, blaming them for the impending destruction of Rome. Cominius argues that Coriolanus has no reason to show mercy. The people deserve such pity of him as the wolf does of the shepherds. Menenius puts the primary blame on the tribunes, but interestingly, says himself and the other senators acted like beasts and cowardly nobles by giving in to the demands of the tribunes and the plebs. This connects to Coriolanus' earlier point, warning about the dangers of the Senate giving plebs whatever they demand out of fear. The Senate did that in this case, and now seems to be suffering the consequences of its poor decision. When the citizens come in, Menenius blames them and scares them with what Coriolanus will bring. You are they that made the air unwholesome, when you cast your stinking, greasy caps in hooting at Coriolanus' exile. Now he's coming, and not a hair upon a soldier's head which will not prove a whip. As many coxcombs as you threw caps up will he tumble down, and pay you for your voices. We have deserved it. Bringing us back to the moments of Coriolanus' exile, Menenius mirrors the language of Coriolanus' speech when he was banished, saying the citizens made the air unwholesome. Interestingly, Menenius concludes his prediction of the destruction of Rome by saying we deserve it, again taking some responsibility on himself and the other senators for giving in to the power of the tribunes. Perhaps this is a suggestion that the citizens should not have political power at all, or that it should be limited, for they are too easily manipulated. In the Volsci camp, Aufidius and his lieutenant lament how beloved Coriolanus is among the Volsces. Aufidius assures his man that he has plans to try to kill Coriolanus. Aufidius wonders about why Coriolanus was so hated in Rome. Was it his pride, his anger in responding to the insults by the tribunes, or his refusal to put on a facade to the citizens, acting pleasingly as a political figure? Act 5 opens in Rome with Cominius telling of his visit to Coriolanus and how he was rejected. Coriolanus refusing to show mercy to the Romans and refusing to distinguish and pardon his few Roman friends when bringing down his vengeance on the whole city. Cominius says of Coriolanus that his injury is the jailer to his pity. Coriolanus refuses mercy because of his hurt feelings and his anger at the injustice of his banishment. Scene 2 continues this portrayal as Menenius pleads with Coriolanus but is also turned away. Scene 3 offers Rome's last hope as Volumnia visits Coriolanus, along with his wife and son. He visits with them, but immediately says that they will not persuade him to give up the attack on Rome. Volumnia acknowledges this, but tries anyway, saying that if he carries out the attack, his family will either have to watch him dragged through the streets in handcuffs, or watch him destroy their city and themselves. Knowing how to play her instrument, Volumnia shifts now from pulling on his heartstrings to calling on his pride, claiming that if he succeeds in destroying Rome, it will ruin his reputation in history, for it is an ignoble victory. Then, with a finishing stroke, she shifts to guilt, claiming that, despite all he owes her, Coriolanus has never showed her any concern. There's no man in the world more bound to his mother, yet here he lets me prate like one in the stocks. Thou hast never in thy life showed thy dear mother any courtesy, when she, poor hen, fond of no second brood, has clucked thee to the wars and safely home, loaden with honor. That is classic motherly guilt, taking credit for his success in the wars and claiming that she has never received any courtesy. Defeated, Coriolanus agrees to seek peace between the Romans and the Volsces, though he seems to understand the price he will pay. You have won a happy victory to Rome, but for your son, believe it, oh believe it, most dangerously you have with him prevailed, if not most mortal to him. He seems to understand seeking peace will lead to his death. It isn't clear if Volumnia knows this as well when so desperately trying to convince him to seek peace. In Scene 4, despite Menenius' lack of optimism, given how roughly Coriolanus treated him, Rome learns that Volumnia was successful in avoiding war. This continues in Scene 5 when the city shows its gratitude to Volumnia and unbanishes Coriolanus. In the last scene of the play, much less impressed by Volumnia's speeches than Coriolanus, Aufidius is furious that the Volsces will not be taking Rome, and takes the opportunity to plan his murder of Coriolanus and regain his position at the head of the army. At a few drops of women's ream, which are as cheap as lies, he sold the blood and labor of our great action. Therefore shall he die, and I'll renew me in his fall. Mirroring the scenes where the tribunes got Coriolanus so angry that he lost his temper and was ultimately banished, Aufidius manipulates Coriolanus' pride, telling the leaders and commoners of Corioli that at his nurse's tears he whined and roared away your victory, and refusing Marcius the title of Coriolanus. Coriolanus immediately loses his temper, inadvisedly pointing out how many Volscians he killed in Corioli to have earned that title. Like an eagle in a dovecote, I fluttered your Volscians in Corioli. Alone I did it. Suddenly reminded of how much pain Coriolanus has brought them, the people of Corioli now call for his death. Aufidius and his men are all too happy to comply. As he seemed to know what happened, Coriolanus dies once he brings peace to Rome and Corioli. Do you feel sorrow at a hero's downfall? Is there justice in Coriolanus' death? As a person and a political figure, Coriolanus raises many important questions. Thanks for joining me on Learning Literature. If you have any follow-up questions, please put them in the comments and click like if you found the video helpful.